Beyond belief, the most unbelievable stories of the Civil War. Today we embark on an extraordinary journey, a journey through the unbelievable, the unexplainable, and the downright mysterious events of the Civil War. This war fought between brothers and countrymen was not just a conflict of muskets and strategy. It was also a battleground for strange phenomena, eerie legends, and moments that defy explanation. We're going to talk about the most incredible tales ever recorded, glowing wounds that saved soldiers' lives, the haunting presence of old green eyes, the eerie premonitions of doomed men, and the mysterious disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. Each story is steeped in history, yet borders on the supernatural. So sit back, listen closely, and decide for yourselves, were these stories simply bizarre coincidences, or was there something greater at work? Chapter 1. The Glowing Wounds of Shiloh. Our first story takes us to April 1862. The bloody Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee. The battlefield was littered with wounded men, suffering through unimaginable pain and infection. But then, something strange happened. Some of the soldiers discovered that their wounds glowed in the dark. Now imagine this scene: the blood-soaked uniforms, the cries of the injured, and then an eerie bluish-green light emanating from their bodies. In the chaos of war, many believed it was divine intervention, a mysterious force protecting them. But what could explain such a phenomenon? Years later, scientists uncovered a remarkable possibility: bioluminescent bacteria. This bacteria, carried by nematodes in the soil, may have entered open wounds, releasing antibacterial compounds that prevented deadly infections. So while the soldiers at Shiloh believed it was a miracle, science tells us it may have been nature working in their favor. But still, why did it happen only to certain men? And how could something so rare occur right when it was most needed? Coincidence, fate, or something else entirely? Chapter 2. Old Green Eyes of Chickamauga. Our next tale is one of terror. The battlefield of Chickamauga, one of the deadliest clashes of the war, has been haunted by something chilling ever since the guns fell silent. Soldiers and civilians alike have claimed to see a figure wandering the field after nightfall, a creature with glowing green eyes. Described as a ghostly apparition, Old Green Eyes is said to have a large humanoid figure with dark hair and unnaturally bright emerald eyes. Some believe he is the restless spirit of a fallen soldier, a tormented soul doomed to wander the land where he died. Others suggest he is something older, something beyond human, a demon, an ancient entity watching over the chaos. What makes this story all the more unsettling is how persistent the sightings have been. To this day, visitors to Chickamauga battlefield whisper about eerie lights in the night, strange noises, and even glimpses of the spectral figure. Whether Green Eyes is a ghost, an omen, or simply folklore, one thing is for certain: his legend will never die. Chapter 3. A Soldier's Premonition. Now we turn to a tale of eerie foresight, a story of men who saw their own fate before it arrived. War has always been a place of tragedy, but there has been many accounts throughout history of soldiers experiencing vivid dreams or visions of their own death before they happened. One chilling account comes from a Union soldier who before battle wrote a letter to his family describing a terrifying dream. He had seen himself struck down on the battlefield in vivid detail, right down to the blood on his uniform and the position of his fallen body. Days later, he perished exactly as his dream foretold. Such premonitions wasn't isolated incidents. Many soldiers reported moments of deep dread before their deaths, as if something beyond human understanding was warning them. Were these visions psychological manifestations of fear, or were they glimpses into something more? Messages from beyond, guiding men toward their fate. Chapter 4: The Vanishing of Ambrose Bierce. To close our journey through the strange, we visit the case of Ambrose Bierce, a Union soldier turned journalist whose life took a final twist into the unknown.
Who was Ambrose Bierce? Well, he was someone that was born back in 1842 there in Ohio from a very large family. In fact, he was actually number 10 out of 13 children. 13 children, can you believe that? Interestingly enough, his name actually followed a theme with regards to all the other children. All of them started with the letter A. So in his case, Ambrose, as his name, clearly matched everyone else's names also, starting with an A. Eventually, though, the Civil War came about, the U.S. Civil War, and he joined an army during that time period in his youth, and then he was able to be in some battles. Apparently, he served into several key battles as well, and he would use actually this particular set of battles as a great way to write his stories later on in his career. After the war finished, in fact, he later found himself there in San Francisco. He got a wife, he got married, he fathered 3 children, and it seemed like life was good for him as is. In fact, he moved back and forth between the U.S. and then England, and then back to the U.S., back to San Francisco, in this case, to continue his writing career. Apparently, he's a pretty prominent journalist, or a pretty prominent writer, in fact. And again, he used a lot of his occurrences, everything that he witnessed there in a battle, to create a lot of strong anti-war papers. So a lot of strong anti-war stories were associated with it. He's pretty famous for a short story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and then some other type of poetry that he wrote. Apparently he wrote one that was with some biting sarcasm called The Devil's Dictionary, and another one called The Cynic's Word Book. I haven't heard of any of these. Maybe some of you have out there, but at least it goes to show that once he finished his military career, then he'd started to do this, become a family man, and then incorporate his writing career in there as well. It reminded me too of that how experiences can sometimes lead to the best works with regards to the short timers. If you haven't heard that novel before, it's because you've seen the movie Full Metal Jacket. Well, Full Metal Jacket is based on the short timers, and it's from the author Gustav Hasford, who used his own experiences there in Vietnam to write so much of his work there in the short timers. So again, experience seems to definitely help when it comes to creating this kind of memorable work when it comes to the writings. Now, as far as his disappearance, this is what has occurred. So, cut to later in his life, he was at age 71. He ended up getting divorced actually by around 1913. So, maybe the kids, all 3 kids seemed like their age, they were all grown up, and then he decided to get divorced. He wanted to then just pursue his own individual lone writer's life, like almost be that mythical person that just travels throughout multiple parts of the world, just making encounters and then writing about it thereafter. That's the impression that I got when I was reading his information here. Don't know exactly, of course, how his now ex-wife felt about all that, but still, he decided to do that. And at the age of 71, you also have to remember that back then in the early 1900s, most people didn't live that long, so he probably thought this is going to be my last chance to do something like this. And so he decided to actually do some things very, very risky. Getting out of the war, especially with regards to the Civil War, would have been the end of most people's battles, like when it comes to being in the military. Here, though, he decided to actually join, at least be a part of the Mexican Revolutionary. He wanted to be in that area as it was happening, and this was again at his age of 71. And this leads furthermore into the theories involving his disappearance. So what happened then is he decided to again travel. His travel eventually led him to Texas, led him to El Paso, and then it led him past that into Mexico. Here's where things kind of change into various versions. One I was reading was stating that he willingly joined the Pancho Villa army down that area because he wanted to chronicle it. He wanted to be able to interview Pancho Villa. He wanted to be able to talk about the battles, see them right up front during the Mexican Revolution. That's one area there. Another one that I read was he was just traveling by himself, and then lo and behold, he eventually got captured, or somewhere along the way got coerced into being with that army, or the armies associated with the Mexicans throughout that area, and then that's where he came across either Pancho Villa or others within that military type war torn country. So that's another throwback on there. And then either way though, it eventually led him into what was considered one of his last known communications to the outside world. It seems like it was very clairvoyant too with regards to this last communication, because it almost made it seem like he knew exactly what was going to happen next. In fact, on one of his last letters, he wrote a note to a relative stating that as he was going into this war-torn country, and he knew obviously all the dangers associated with it, he didn't seem to mind. He knew that he was old. In fact, people that knew him at that time stated that he had a severe case of asthma. He couldn't even ride a horse because of his conditions during that time period. So he almost felt like this was the last set of days within his life. So in his letter, he stated, "Goodbye. If you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags, please know that I think that it was a pretty good way to depart this life. It beats old age, disease, or falling down the cellar stairs. I shall not be here long enough to hear from you, and don't know where I shall be next." And so this was one of the last known, again, communications regarding his existence. And then that was it. Nobody heard from him thereafter. He was literally never heard from again. So whatever occurred to him, that's where all the mystery is associated. So even though he was a pretty prominent journalist / writer at that time, and even though he pretty much made it known to everyone that he was going to travel down this war-torn country on his own during his last days, nobody seems to know exactly what happened to him thereafter. So whether he was with the Pancho Villa army and during one of his battles, in fact, apparently he was there during the time period of the Battle of Tierra Blanca, whether he became a victim with regards to one of those battles, like let's say being killed during the battle or being wounded and then dying from it thereafter, that's one theory. Another theory is that he actually lived long enough past those battles to escape an area. Some people even claiming that he traveled back to Texas to try to be able to get back, I guess, to the U.S. and then live out whatever he could over here. But he was caught afterward by others from the Mexican army or from other revolutionaries and then killed thereafter. That's another theory. Another one is that he actually made it back to the border, but without any kind of identification, because it seemed like he was also someone who was trying to keep his identity a secret. Maybe he knew he was kind of semi-famous. He didn't want anybody to essentially know that that was him. So when he was found, there wasn't any proper identification, nothing along those lines. And there he was, probably dying from wounds associated with the battle. So he was pretty much anonymous. And then others that state in an almost like depressed manner that sure enough, he died in one of those battles.
The thin line between history and mystery. What can we take away from these astonishing accounts? Were they supernatural events, scientific anomalies, or simple coincidences blown into legend by time? Perhaps the greatest truth is that history is never as clear-cut as textbooks make it seem. The Civil War, a conflict built on pain and sacrifice, is filled with stories that blur the line between fact and myth. And now, as we close this journey, I leave you with a question. In war, where death lurks and uncertainty reigns, could these strange events be reminders that there is more to life and death that we can ever truly understand? So thank you for walking through the unbelievable with me today. And as the echoes of history fade, may we never stop searching for the stories that keep us alive. Have a good day, guys.